personalities of ourself, and that the ego either it wants to identify with, comes to identify through, or wants to reject. What is in relation, the ego is in relation one way or another with the splinter personality. So in a way, that's when Marley's saying, as a therapist working with somebody whose self is identified with the mother, daughter, mother, son self, to begin to work to separate that is a shock. It's an amputation. It's a soulful kind of amputation in a way, and that's what Thomas meant by the feeling tone. Feeling tone sounds kind of abstract, but when you feel it, the shock, she represented it really well. It's shock. That's the feeling tone of it. It's like, oh, I can't go there. So that feeling tone aspect of it. So now Thomas Singer, he's gonna interest us all by talking. Say he's gonna talk about Obama, but we're not getting that whole thing. So just disclaimer. We can talk about that amongst ourselves.
I'm going to present Obama's presidency and his struggles in.
So I don't.
Well, and we're pretty good in Los Angeles, especially about dealing with complexes of attachment. And something that was said earlier that maybe we can finish up on is that in doing the shadow work, sometimes then, as a community, doing the shadow work, sometimes we'll create our own identities that have their own shadows, because it's just the nature of any identity to cast a shadow. So yes, I think we have to accept the fact that getting together as a community, we will create our own complexes that will require our own shadow work. And but it's a dialectical process, and that and we are used to working with some complexes in terms of the mother complex. I think it was really important what was said today about not blaming the mother. I mean, that's the shadow work of our tradition right now. But there'll be work around how in a certain stage of our development as a community we have to talk about certain notions such as heteronormativity. But heteronormativity is going to become its own complex, cultural complex. It's going to have shadow material too. And we're at least now as a group, we have Thomas put out, we have our characteristics that we can go to, and we can say, oh, it feels powerful and repetitive, highly charged, emotionally reactive, resistant to our efforts to make them conscious, that we're accumulating experience that validates a point of view and creates a storehouse of self-affirming ancestral memories. Well, let's hope we can create a storehouse of self-affirming ancestral memories for sexual orientations, right? We need to do that work. But however, it will get to a point where it becomes a storehouse that is going to come up and need to be challenged. It'll have shadow material. I mean, there's no end point. Individuation does not finish. I mean, Jung was depressed at the end of his life. Hopefully we'll be able to invite an analyst who's working locally who actually had sessions with Jung and was there with James Hillman. And I asked him recently about, what did Jung think sort of at the end of his life? He said he was really depressed. He thought he was a failure. And I said, well, why do you think it's a failure? He said, because all he really wanted to do was to teach people, remind them that they had a soul. And he failed. And because he thought that people had lost a connection to the way that traditionally people had connected to the soul through religion. There was nothing that had come up that took that place. But Lionel Corbett, another analyst down the road at Pacifica, is talking about ways in which sort of depth psychology doesn't become a religion, it becomes a way for people to reconnect with their soul. And so it's secular in a sense, but as Doug said beautifully today, I appreciate so much what he said about the religious function of the psyche, which is really missed, and the yumminess of the religious function of the psyche. I mean, that image of God that is just in the, I don't know, the white robes or the, well, okay, that's okay, that works. But it's just not sexy. I mean, you see religions who they adore the Aphrodite Uranus, and they adore the god. They're passionate about the god. I mean, if you've lost the juice and the passion for it, then you have lost your religious connection to the psyche. And the psyche wants to speak through us, and wants all the things that we are. The psyche wants our gay selves, and wants our woman selves, and wants our white-haired selves, and wants our, and our Japanese Latino selves. The psyche wants all of these selves. Do we create a space in which we can allow that to express? and where do we get stuck, and what are the characteristics of stuckness? Those are the complexes. Yes.
It's too bad that Jung died in 61.
Yeah.
Just before the door opened in 67 and consciousness shifted, because it was everything he was hoping for.
He thought it would happen, it would take about, I don't know, 500 years or something like that for it to come around.
And it was just before he passed.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the movie, that's controversial, but the dangerous method, I mean, at that time, at the end of that movie, which is the young version of Jung, he, before he did the descent to his unconscious, he had a lot of dreams about the blood running over Europe and the blood war. And in the 50s, he was also really fascinated with UFOs, but also nuclear annihilation. So he thought that really our only way out to survive is to relate to the psyche. That's our only way out of annihilation. And when I was growing up my age, I'm turning 50 next month, I grew up under the daily recognition of nuclear annihilation. I mean, when we grew up, kids who were growing up in the 60s, we still did jumped under our desks and did our our atomic bomb drills and stuff, as if that's going to getting under here. The wooden desk. But that's a collective kind of cultural complex that a lot of us lived under, and there's different ones. I mean, so he lived under annihilation of this, and psyche is, and attending to psyche, which is what psychotherapy means. Therapy is attending. Healing, but really attending, just listening to psyche. Attending to psyche is he thought that our only way out, our only way through, over, under. You can't go under it. Gotta go over.
So when you were talking about, Jung at the end of his life, it makes me wonder what were the cultural complexes in him that were still alive, that influenced how he felt about himself at the end.
Yeah.
I mean, if we go back to his early days. He was coming out of a cultural complex of Eurocentric domination and male-centered, Eurocentric male domination. Christian, right? So there's a lot of different forces at play in him, as in all of us, right? I think we're still reeling from the cultural complex around colonization, around Puritanism here in this country.
Just a couple of points. I think that with his fascination with UFOs, and which happened, I guess, in the mid-50s, late 50s, something like that, he looked at that to a certain extent as the initiation of the feminine archetype coming back into the culture.
And through Catholicism,
Which around the same time, right, with Catholicism in 1959, with the doctrine of the Assumption of Mary, celebrating that as finding that there is a feminine deity that's recognized in the West, which hadn't occurred since then.
and a fourth.
And a fourth.
He loved fourth. So the Trinity always bugged him.
Right.
And now Mary is the fourth. He loved that. It's like it all works out.
I may just want to go back to the defenses for a second, because I think it's important, and I know I don't have to tell this group this, but for me it's important to remember that the defenses weren't invented by Freud. Freud just named them.
Right.
But these were, we could look at them as archetypal, we could look at them as through an evolutionary lens, but it's important to look at this is how the ego, this is how the psyche has defended itself, and to look at the other side of the archetype, to look at not only the spiritual but the meat, the body, the flesh, the brain. This is also, well, I'm talking about the brain.
Oh, the brain.
The brain. And how the brain is also organized in such a way to turn off things like mentalization and empathy when it's feeling threatened or attacked. And so I think that when we look at a defense, it's important to respect that defense, or else we've got to take some responsibility for the fragmentation that's going on and own our own power shadow about what we're doing with the client.
Yeah, I mean that is one of the shadow materials of opening up a process to analyze and work with the defenses, and you always have to, as you say, just don't open up a can of worms that you can't kind of close in the 50 minutes. I mean, you are over time, but to recognize that the defenses have a function, a psychobiological function, and
So there's that tension of opposites, right? And kind of opening up.
Yeah,
working with the client.
This other book, the last thing, Multicultural Imagination, Michael Vannoy Adams. It's another Jungian book on kind of parallel to this Kimball Singer, but just in terms of speaking to academic institutions. Let me just read this and finish that. Schools of social work and universities offer courses on ethnocultural issues, cultural sensitivity, ethnic minority concerns, and oppression of diverse populations. As admirable as these curricular efforts are, as valuable as they may be, they are not attempts to analyze, but to sensitize. They function primarily at the level of the conscious rather than the level of the unconscious. They tend to operate on the surface rather than at the depth. What we need in addition, I believe, and what psychoanalysis uniquely offers us is an opportunity to address issues of race and racism from the perspective of the unconscious and the other complexes. And so, because we're only doing part of the job if we do that, and I think that's probably a lot of people have felt that you're working in that day when you have the training on, ethnic sensitivity, and it's like, we don't really want to go for sensitivity. We want to cut out the sensitivity and get to the real underlying issues, and I think one way of doing that is to look at the unconscious, which again is not some other world or some abstract notion, but is here and just not in the light of the conscious ego. I mean, it's real. The unconscious is real and alive, just not necessarily in the focus of the ego. It's unknown in that sense. It's not under the light of mindfulness. But it doesn't mean it's somewhere else. There is nowhere else. So, yes.
So I guess we just have a few minutes. Any other questions or comments?
I was wondering maybe if anyone was aware, because we sort of started with questions about somatic awareness, and did anyone notice through the presentation just sort of how your body was speaking, your body unconscious, so to speak, or I had the feeling that, one of the shadows perhaps even of this community or this conversation, well, it's well intended to want to make the changes that we're suggesting or open the conversation. Just to feel my own psychobiological resistance to really moving into an arena of the unknown, to really dropping it, is profound. It's massive. I'm very attached to my comfort.
Yeah.
Even though I have a kind of I have a rap about wanting to be open-minded and about wanting to host conversations that are going to foster useful change and blah, 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 blah. It's really interesting to just watch myself, just even subjectively, just approach the edge. It's like, okay, to a point. And so I was just wondering if anyone else was noticing
too far. Go farther, go farther, too far. You're about to go over too far. For sure, yeah, it's fair.
It's like Lazari was saying, and then go further, then see beyond.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what's great about this forum, this class, is that we get to go this far, and then you'll have it again next quarter, and you'll go a little further.
Yeah.
Well, I like the way you said there's no choice in some sense.
Yeah,
and true. This as a clinician, because, and I think we all your instructors, the ones in this group, probably will talk about how much we don't know. I mean, the most experienced clinicians will emphasize to you how much it's unknown, and that how to tolerate that and deal with that, and to recognize the toll that it takes in terms of burnout, in terms of anxiety, in terms of depression, and what are some of the defenses that we use, what are some of the character. I kind of make a joke with Freudians and Jungians. They kind of hang out with both clubs, and I was often tell them, I said, well, the Freudians are all narcissistic and the Jungians are all borderline. Neither the Freudians nor the Jungians actually like that characterization. I still think there's something to it. But what are the ways in which, as depth psychologists, what are the typical kind of defenses that we bring up in terms of dealing with the unknown? Because the exploration of the unknown. I like this morning about the characterization of being a foreigner everywhere, being a stranger. There's a strong archetype among all cultures of how you relate to the stranger, and most cultures actually have a ethic of hospitality toward the stranger. It kind of makes it safer. I mean, it's just like why they say babies are cute, because they need you to want to take care of them, right? And so maybe we have hospitality to the stranger because we have a better chance of them not trying to kill us, the thing that we actually fear they're going to do. And hospitality toward the unconscious. But the unconscious, as Doug said today, comes up in really, what was the word? I don't know, icky form. I mean, it comes in very harsh forms. And as therapists, you're seeing that now in your training, or you're seeing that in your work, that it comes up, and it comes up against you as a therapist too. The complexes are going to come through you. I love, again, what Doug said about the time. You know, isn't it true that whenever it could be the microsecond when you're looking at the clock, that's the time that the person looks at you. Right? You could have somebody in session all day looking like this and talking, and all of a sudden, and then you look at the clock, you still look, and it's like, right? So, and then how that feels, how it's activated in that, and it's like, oh, you don't care, you're just da da da.
I mean, so I think that's sort of like the unconscious wants to be made known, right?
Yeah.
And yet, so with the cultural complex, there is that part of us that wants to go into it, wants to feel it, wants to get, you know, get some understanding of it, to gain some a different relationship to it, right? So it's not that we make it go away, it's like how to have a different relationship to it. Yeah.
See, I'm kind of just thinking out loud, but that might mean Mark, you just activated a complex in me, I'm not sure. But I'm kind of relating to what you just said to what Matt started off with this morning in terms of the shadow side of personality one, is the way he conceptualized it. And the conversation talking about really trying to understand a personality, if you will. And I was thinking of it as, I think Zari, is her name Zari, was talking about the relational aspect of that. You can only know that through a relationship with one another. And it seemed to me that as I thought back on the shadow aspects, that the shadow aspects really manifest themselves through the analyst or therapist, if you will, or the theoretician, taking kind of this God's eye view, this all-knowing, this expert position, rather than taking this position of curiosity, of not knowing, of you know, going into each session without any agenda, without any treatment plan, if you will, but rather just a curiosity about the other person. And out of that dialogue comes meaning. And you know, and in that sense, I think that's kind of what we're trying to do here today, is create meaning out of a dialogue. And that's kind of part of the dialectic, and whatever comes out of that, and it's just kind of an ongoing process to continually make meaning in a community that hopefully has some shared values, and that can be communicated in a way that, you know, perpetuates some kind of community values.
Well,
so,
a shared value to gather together.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a shared value in therapy. I mean, I think that's, I like the idea of theory as contemplation, and we can bring a contemplation into the session, and our contemplation could be to have no memory or desire, to be open and so on. But there's always the bipolar nature of it. So just now you bring it up. Was it yesterday? Sunday, Friday. Analytic patient started off saying, "You don't tell me, you knew this all along and you didn't tell me, and how come you didn't tell me a year ago what I just figured out right now," kind of thing. As if I knew, which I didn't. But that nature of that kind of projection, even if I did know, the idea that you know, you knew this and you just sort of let me go on for a month because you therapists think that I'm supposed to figure it out for myself. And okay, I'm not saying anything. I'm not a neutral analyst, but I mean, there's no space to say anything. So shoot, like you guys all do this, and you know everything, and you don't say, and that's probably why you do it. And she sort of wrapped it all up, but went through herself, but went through that kind of dynamic of, with respect to the culture of therapy and analysis, in terms of how she discovered her own view and her ambivalence about the idea of analysis as offering an open space, but also the kind of expectation of the analyst or the therapist that you know something, you're just not telling me.
Yeah.
Especially if they're paying you. It's like, okay, you saved me a lot of money, you just told me this 2 years ago. Right? So it brings both up.
Right.